Welcome to the deep dive. Today, our mission is to really take a deep look into the historical record, a record that many people find, frankly, quite difficult to confront. We are going to be tackling the documented conduct of the second major figure in early Islamic history and his conduct specifically toward women.
And the crucial point here is where we're getting this information. We are focusing exclusively on narratives and records preserved within classical Sunni literature itself.
Exactly. This isn't an outside critique.
No, this is why a deep dive like this is so necessary. Our listener, you, need a comprehensive, thoroughly sourced understanding that, it moves beyond the popular, often simplified narrative of the gentle patriarch.
Right.
To truly get history, you have to engage with the primary documents, even when the facts they contain are uncomfortable or they completely surprise the established story.
And that's our whole strategy for today. The proof originates within the opposing sect's own literature. We want to see what this tradition, at its absolute foundational level, tells us about this figure's character.
That's it. So when we bring up a story, you'll know exactly where it's from. We're relying exclusively on the bedrock of Sunni scholarship, the major Sahih collections like Sahih al-Bukhari, Sunan Ibn Majah.
And the big historical works.
The big ones, Tariq al-Tabari, al-Kamil fi al-Tariq, and then the foundational legal books, al-Mabsut was not Ahmad. These are the sources that define his legacy.
We've broken this down into 7 points. We'll start with the foundational myth, and then we'll walk through 6 distinct documented incidents.
It's a way to trace a pattern, really, from his pre-conversion actions to legal policies to domestic life and even the lethal consequences of his public reputation.
It's an extensive analysis, so let's jump right in with that foundation. The myth of the gentle patriarch and the story of when a whip is scarier than a sword. So when you hear about this figure in, a popular discussion, the frame is almost always justice.
Unwavering justice, right? And personal austerity, necessary toughness.
Exactly. He's presented as this archetype of the strong, maybe a little stern, but ultimately just leader. But when you move from that myth to the actual historical assessment of his persona, that toughness takes on a much darker dimension.
It does. And we don't have to guess at how severe he was. The early scholars, they gave us a direct, almost visceral way to measure it. They used a benchmark for cruelty that everyone at the time would have instantly understood.
And what was that benchmark?
It comes from a famous quote attributed to the scholar 𝗪𝗵𝗶𝗵. He provided a metric of terror that is, it's genuinely hard to process. He said, and I quote, "The whip, Durra, of Umar was more terrifying than the sword of Hajjaj ibn Yusuf Thaqafi." Okay,
we need to unpack that because for listeners who aren't, specialists in this period, the name Hajjaj might not immediately register as sheer terror. Who was Hajjaj?
Hajjaj ibn Yusuf Thaqafi is, in the historical record, basically synonymous with tyranny, extreme systematic brutality. He was a governor, a military commander, and he became legendary for his severity.
Like what kind of severity?
We're talking mass executions, public torture, and operating with a complete indifference to any legal limits. He was the embodiment of state terror. In fact, one scholar, Umar ibn Abdulaziz, is recorded as saying that if every nation brought its most evil individual, and the Muslims brought Hajjaj's evil would outweigh all of theirs combined.
Wow. So he's the historical benchmark for wickedness.
He is. And that assessment is documented right there in a legal text like al-Mabsut. So when 𝗪𝗵𝗵 makes that comparison,
saying the whip of this man was scarier than the sword of the most brutal tyrant they knew.
Exactly. It tells you something terrifying. The fear of Hajjaj's sword was, the ultimate fear, death. But the fear of this figure's Durra, his whip, was a fear of constant, unpredictable daily pain and public humiliation.
So it was more pervasive.
It was more pervasive. It meant his cruelty wasn't just for, major rebellions. It was a daily feature of life. The psychological weight of that constant arbitrary threat was, in its own way, more crushing than the threat of Hajjaj's sword.
And we know he personally established this tool of control.
Absolutely. The historical sources, like Tariq al-Tabari and al-Kamil fi al-Tariq, they explicitly state he was the first person who carried the whip and struck others with it. He didn't inherit this practice, he started it. The Durra, as an official, everyday instrument of discipline, that was his innovation.
And it seems he knew this about himself, this harshness.
He did. His own words confirm it. When he took power, he publicly acknowledged his own disposition. There are records in Kansa al-Amal and al-Tabaqat al-Kubra where he prays to God, saying, "Oh God, I am rough, harsh Galis, so soften me."
That word 𝗬𝗧𝗋, it means coarse, tough, harsh. It's a self-admission.
It's a critical piece of data.
Yeah.
It grounds all the violence we're about to discuss in an acknowledged personal trait. This wasn't just, situational justice. It was the application of a core characteristic that he himself recognized.
A characteristic that, as we'll see, persisted and became policy, especially towards women.
Precisely. So with that foundation, set a reputation for harshness, self-admitted, symbolized by that terrifying whip. Let's go back in time, before he held any power, and see how this disposition first showed itself.
Okay, so we're rewinding to Mecca. This is during the intense persecution of the very first Muslims.
Right. And he, before his conversion, was known as a brutal tormentor of the new converts.
And while there are general stories, the specific accounts about his violence against a female slave named Libayba, they're incredibly revealing.
They really are. The story of Libayba is preserved in Ibn Athir's major history, al-Khamil-fi The details of the torture are brutal, but it's the explanation he gives for stopping the torture that truly tells you everything about his mindset at the time.
So what exactly did he do to her?
The sources are clear. He would physically torment her over and over, trying to break her will and make her renounce Islam. He would just keep going in this cycle of violence until he hit a certain limit.
And what was the limit? Was it a moment of pity or...
His own physical stamina. He only stopped when he grew too tired to keep beating her.
Wait, he stopped because his arm got tired.
Yes. The sheer physical exhaustion of being the torturer was the only thing that gave her a pause.
That's a chilling detail. It changes everything.
It does. The direct quote from Ibn Athir is damning. When he would finally release her, he'd say to her, "I only stopped because I became tired." The Arabic word is sarama, meaning he became weary, bored, or exhausted.
So it completely debunks any attempt to say, oh, maybe his conscience was stirring, or maybe mercy was dawning on him.
Not at all. His impulse was just pure, unmitigated violence, driven right up to the physical limits of his own endurance. It shows a profound lack of any moral restraint when he's faced with defiance.
And this was directed at the most vulnerable person imaginable, a female slave.
The most vulnerable person in that society, who had zero power to resist. It establishes a very dark precedent for how he would later interact with women.
And it wasn't an isolated incident, was it? We see the same immediate physical response when he finds out his own sister, Fatima, had converted.
The exact same pattern. The accounts in sources like Fada'il al-Sahaba confirm he attacked both her and her husband. He struck his sister so hard that her face was bloodied and her head was cut open.
So his default response to disagreement, whether from a slave or his own sister, was immediate physical assault.
It was his ingrained method of interaction. And this inherent roughness, this ghali's nature, once he became the caliph, it didn't disappear. It just moved from being personal rage to becoming systematic, legally enforced policy.
And that brings us to our next incident, which is, well, it's a systemic, legalistic application of violence that's deeply troubling. This isn't just a random act anymore. This is policy.
Yes, this is where a personal trait becomes enshrined as a kind of law. We're talking about a class-based dress code enforced with physical punishment.
A dress code.
The core practice involved physically beating enslaved women. The sources use the legal term jariya, or ama, for daring to wear symbols of modesty, specifically the head covering, the kaimar, or the outer garment, the jilbab.
He would beat them for trying to be modest. Why? What was the justification for that?
The justification was explicit, and it was all about social hierarchy. Modesty and the dignity that came with it was seen as a right reserved exclusively for free women, al-Arier. An enslaved woman was to be legally and socially denied the right to resemble a free woman in piety or status.
So if he saw a slave woman wearing a veil in public, what would he do?
He would strike her with his whip, and he would often shout things to humiliate her. The recorded statement is, "Remove the veil from yourself, O filthy one. Are you trying to resemble free women?"
Oh, filthy one.
Yes. The term is 𝗹𝗵𝗃. It links her act of piety directly to pretense, to contamination. It reinforces the idea that such dignity was just, not for her. The scholar al-Albani confirms this narrative from Ibn Abi Shaiba. He saw a veiled slave woman, beat her, and commanded her not to resemble free women.
And this wasn't just a public policy. He enforced this within his own home.
That's a critical detail, and it's confirmed by Anas ibn Malik, who is one of the most reliable narrators. His accounts are in major collections, including the foundational legal text, al-Mabsut.
And what did Anas document?
Anas stated explicitly that this figure's own maidservants, when they were serving guests in his home, would do so with their heads bare and their breasts shaking. The Arabic is tadrib thadiyun.
Wait, the sources are that explicit? their breasts shaking?
That visceral. It's not just that the covering was forbidden. It's that they were expected to be presented to male guests in a state that was physically exposed and visibly shaken. It's a calculated way to emphasize their low status and total lack of protection.
It's systematic humiliation.
It is. And this has profound and lasting legal consequences. This wasn't just recorded as a story. This practice of beating women for wearing the khimar was cited by major Sunni jurists, like al-Sarakhsi, as a legal precedent.
A legal precedent for what?
For defining the acceptable legal appearance of enslaved women. It was used to reinforce the legal segregation of modesty based on social class. So it basically legalized punishing a woman for an act of piety simply because of her social standing.
So that's how it moves from just, a personal act of cruelty to becoming foundational law, to becoming fish.
Exactly. Because the actions of a caliph, especially the second one, were seen by many as a model, a sunnah. So if he strikes a slave woman for wearing a veil, jurists then use that action to define the legal boundaries of who must wear a veil and who is forbidden from it.
It establishes that social class can override a general spiritual encouragement for modesty.
Yes. And that's why a text like al-Mabsut is so important here. It shows you the direct line from the whip in the ruler's hand to a chapter in a law book. The inherent roughness, the ghali's nature, it's no longer just a personal flaw. It's now an authoritative legal tool for controlling and degrading an entire class of women.
A deeply disturbing progression. So, from public policy, let's now move into his most intimate circle, his own home. This next incident, it really shows how that myth of the gentle patriarch just completely breaks down behind his own four walls. And it creates this shocking, self-serving license for domestic abuse that gets codified later.
And this wasn't some hidden secret. It happened while a prominent guest, Ashath ibn Qays, was staying overnight in his house. He became an accidental witness to the caliph's private conduct.
What exactly did Ash see that night?
He says that in the middle of the night, the caliph just got up and started beating his wife. Ashath was so alarmed by this sudden violence that he felt he had to intervene, and he physically stopped the beating.
So he was caught red-handed by a respected guest in his own home. You would expect some embarrassment, maybe an apology?
There was no apology. Instead, he immediately provided a powerful and frankly very convenient justification for his actions, and he framed it as a prophetic tradition.
What did he say?
According to the records in both Sunan ibn Majah and Musnad Ahmad, he turned to Ashath and said, "O Ashath, remember something I heard from Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. A man should not be questioned about why he beats his wife. The Arabic is Allah yusalu al-rajulu fima yatrubu imratahu."
That is shocking. He uses the name of the prophet to cite a tradition that gives him and all men total immunity for domestic violence right after being stopped from doing it.
This is the historical gravity of that moment. This single anecdote gets recorded as a sahih, an authentic hadith, in foundational Sunni texts like Sunan ibn Majah and al-Hakim's al-Mustadrak ala-Sahih.
So it provides an unquestionable license for domestic violence within the community.
Instantly, the ruler is caught in the act, and his immediate defense is to claim a divinely sanctioned immunity clause.
Let's talk about the significance of this being authenticated, of it being called sahih. Why is that so pivotal?
Because it creates a huge, undeniable conflict in the tradition. We know from countless other sahih accounts that the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ himself was gentle. His wife 𝗪 explicitly said he never struck a servant or a woman.
Never.
But here you have the second most authoritative figure in the state, a man who has already admitted to being ghali's, providing a tradition that not only excuses his violence, but prevents anyone from even questioning it.
So if a regular person reads Sunan ibn Majah, they see the highest authority in the land committing violence, citing a tradition that grants immunity, and that tradition is then confirmed as authentic.
It normalizes it. It legalizes it. It excuses domestic abuse under the cover of religious authority. It completely shifts the legal paradigm for marriage. The gentle example of the Prophet, which is all about mercy and partnership, it becomes, in practice, secondary to this precedent of unquestionable masculine authority enforced by violence.
All based on the conduct and self-justification of a figure known for his harshness.
It's a stark contrast, and it becomes a major point of tension in later legal discussions about marital rights.
This violence was normalized, legalized. And that now brings us to another public setting where his personal harshness clashed directly with the mercy of Prophet Muhammad ﷺ himself.
Yes, this section covers multiple, very consistent instances where his impulsive need to control people with violence came into direct conflict with a command from the Prophet, especially in moments that should have been about compassion, like mourning.
We're starting at the funeral of Ruqayya, the daughter of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. So this is a moment of intense personal grief for the Prophet himself. What happened?
The sources, like Musnad Ahmad, they paint a very clear and painful picture. The women were gathered and they were weeping openly over the loss of Ruqayya, and his response was immediate disciplinary violence. He took out his Durra, his whip, and he started whipping the mourning women to try and stop their wailing.
In front of the Prophet. He was whipping the women, mourning the Prophet's own daughter while the Prophet was there.
Yes, and this is the moment of definitive conflict. The Prophet had to physically intervene to stop him. He literally grabbed the man's hand, or the whip itself, and gave a direct, unmistakable command. Let them weep. 𝗲𝗵𝗵𝗵𝗵.
That image it's almost surreal. The Prophet Muhammad ﷺ has to physically restrain him, run interference, just to allow people to grieve at his own daughter's funeral.
It just starkly illustrates the difference in their temperaments. The Prophet commands compassion, respecting the natural human expression of grief. This figure's instant, habitual response is the whip, control.
And this habit of beating women for mourning, it didn't stop there. It continued long after the Prophet passed away.
It did. There's a second incident, recorded in Tariq al-Tabari and al-Kamil fi al-Tariq, right after the death of Abu Bakr. His female relatives started mourning loudly. The Caliph demanded silence.
And when they didn't comply,
he ordered them to be dragged out of the house. And when Farwa, who was Abu Bakr's own sister, was physically brought out, he struck her with a whip, several blows.
So he's physically assaulting the sister of the first caliph who has just died for the act of grieving.
Yes. It shows a complete intolerance for any form of expressive female emotion or defiance of his commands. And there's a third detail from Musannaf Abd-al-Razzaq that's just as telling.
What's that one?
Women were gathered in the house of al-Mu'min Maymuna, one of the Prophet's wives, mourning the death of the famous general Khalid ibn Walid. Again, he arrives with his whip and starts beating them and forcing them out. And in the chaos, one of the women's head coverings falls off.
And his response to that?
When people pointed it out that her covering had fallen, he replied that this woman had no respect, meaning she had forfeited her sanctity, her dignity, by engaging in the act of mourning that he disapproved of.
That is profound. So in his view, if a woman transgressed his personal rules by mourning too loudly or wearing a veil when he thought she shouldn't, she lost her right to basic dignity.
He stripped her of her honor, and the whip was the tool he used to enforce that. These accounts just show, again and again, that whether the woman was a slave, a grieving sister, or even in the home of one of the Prophet's wives, the Durra was his reflexive tool for controlling female expression. It created a climate of fear.
And if the whip itself was terrifying, this next incident shows that the atmosphere of fear he created reached a lethal psychological extreme. His reputation alone became a deadly weapon.
This is maybe the most sobering narrative of all, because it directly connects his reputation to legal liability for, essentially, manslaughter. The case involves a pregnant woman who was summoned for questioning about some allegation.
Okay, and what happened when she received the summons?
The sources, including the son of Abd-al-Razzaq, they record her reaction as just overwhelming panic. As soon as she heard she was being brought before him, she cried out, "Woe to her, what is she to do with Umar?"
So she was already terrified.
Paralyzed by terror. As she was being led to him, she was struck with such profound fright, the source says, Fazad, that she ducked into a house and immediately miscarried. The child was born alive, it cried twice, and then it died.
So the death wasn't caused by a physical blow, it was caused by the psychological terror of his reputation.
Yes. This proves that, quote, we started with, the whip was scarier than the sword, because the reputation of the whip was itself a weapon. And of course, the legal implications of this were huge. The Caliph had to seek a ruling from the companions on whether he was liable.
And what did they say?
Initially, many of them advised him that he wasn't liable. They argued that, a miscarriage caused by fear wasn't a legally punishable offense.
But Imam Ali alayhi salam, he gave a different ruling.
A definitive one. When Imam alayhi salam was consulted, he first warned the other companions, saying that if they gave that ruling just to please the ruler, they weren't being sincere advisors.
And what was his actual verdict?
He stated that the ruler was absolutely liable for the child's blood money, the diya.
On what grounds?
Imam Ali alayhi salam's reasoning was that the ruler was the direct actionable cause of death. The terror and fright his summons inspired. That was the instrument of death. The caliph's own known harshness was deemed the weapon that killed the child.
And here's the point we have to stress. This isn't just some contested, obscure story.
No, this is absolutely critical for you, the listener, to understand. This incident is so historically certain and so legally recognized that it became a foundational precedent in the Assyrian classical Sunni law.
Where? In what context?
Right in the chapters on criminal liability, the 𝗕𝗵𝗵𝗵𝗵. Major scholars like Muhyiddin al-Nawawi in his al-Majmu', and even the founder of the Hanbali school, 𝗪-𝗵𝗵𝗵𝗵, they cite this exact case.
To establish what principle?
To establish the principle that a ruler is civilly liable for death caused by the fright or terror his command inspires. The fact that this is used as a foundational case in law books confirms that his intimidating, lethal nature was a historical certainty.
The terror he inspired was so well known that it's woven into the very fabric of jurisprudence about blood money. So now we return to his personal reputation and how it impacted his own life. This culminates in a pretty shocking rejection of a marriage proposal, which is just a dramatic confirmation of his cruelty.
This is the moment where the victim gives a direct, candid assessment of his character. This happened at the height of his power during his caliphate. He proposed marriage to Kulthum, who was the daughter of Abu Bakr.
So an extremely high-status proposal, a huge political and social opportunity for her.
You would think. But the girl herself rejected it.
On what grounds could she possibly refuse the caliph?
Her refusal was shocking because of how direct it was. When her sister Aisha came to her about the proposal, Kulthum stated firmly she wanted nothing to do with him. And her reason, which is recorded in Tariq al-Tabari and al-Istiyab, was a blunt assessment of his notorious character.
What exactly did she say?
She told Aisha, and I'm quoting here, "I have no need for him. Yes, because he is rough in life and harsh toward women."
Harsh toward women. Shadid ala al-Nisa.
Shadid ala al-Nisa. That phrase, coming from a young woman right in the political center, it confirms that his reputation for domestic violence wasn't a secret. It wasn't speculation. It was a known fact, a fact strong enough to justify refusing the most powerful man in the empire.
And it wasn't just her observation, right? Others confirmed it.
His own advisors did. Mughira ibn Shu'bah specifically warned him against marrying this young girl.
And what was Mughira's concern?
His concern was the near certainty of abuse. He was worried that because the caliph was, in his words, a hard man with women, shaded, and the girl was young and might be playful, that if she disobeyed him, well, he would inevitably beat her.
So the fear was political fallout from the expected abuse.
Yes, Mughira was worried that her crying would upset her influential family and cause political problems. The whole warning was built on the established premise that this figure's response to any domestic defiance was physical violence.
It's a tragic paradox, isn't it? The very harshness, the 𝗲𝗬𝗧 nature that he admitted to and used to enforce his authority was the exact thing that made him undesirable as a husband.
It was. His reputation for cruelty was so widespread that even young women who stood to gain immense power knew to refuse him based on his character alone.
And this incident really summarizes everything we've talked about.
It does. It brings it all together. We've traced this consistent pattern of violence against women in every category. Pre-conversion against a slave, systemically against enslaved women as a class, domestically against his wife, publicly against mourners, lethally against a citizen through terror.
And it culminates in this undisputed confirmation of his character from the people closest to the situation. The evidence is just pervasive.
So to synthesize this deep dive for you, the listener, the most crucial element here is the consistency, the depth of the evidence. We've used nothing but foundational Sunni literature to document his conduct across every class, every relationship, every legal status.
And we saw how that personal harshness, that 𝗲𝗬𝗧 nature, became institutionalized.
It's not just anecdotal, it's structural.
Right. We saw him use a conveniently cited tradition, one that's recorded as Sahih in Sunan Ibn Majah, to grant a kind of blanket immunity for domestic violence. And then we saw his intimidating nature so clearly confirmed that it resulted in a foundational legal precedent cited by Imam Ali alayhi salam and codified by major jurists, establishing liability for death caused by fright alone.
And these narratives, they aren't some marginalized fringe opinions. They are validated right inside the foundational literature used by the very people who uphold his legacy today. The historical facts consistently show a figure whose harshness was known, systemic, and for some accepted as a necessary quality of leadership.
Which gives you that complete, complex, and often very uncomfortable picture.
That's the goal.
So what's the final takeaway for us, for the modern learner trying to reconcile these historical facts with the spirit of Islam we hear about, the one of mercy?
I think the final provocative thought has to be about the internal tension this creates within the tradition itself. You have the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, who consistently taught and exemplified mercy and gentleness.
Right.
So, how did the formal acceptance, the codification, and the spread of this personal and structural harshness, which we've seen directly conflicts with the Prophet's conduct, how did that shape the early path of Islamic jurisprudence? You have to consider what it means for a legal tradition when precedents of violence and control, all stemming from this one figure, stand as valid legal counterpoints to the accepted sunnah of the Prophet himself.
That's the question this historical record forces you to confront.
It is.
A truly necessary and very deep exploration. Thank you for joining us as we went through these profoundly challenging narratives from the historical sources themselves.
Thank you. Keep seeking knowledge and analyzing the sources.
We'll see you next time on The Deep Dive.
Praise belongs to God, who was kind to us through Muhammad. God bless him and his household, to the exclusion of past communities and bygone generations, displaying thereby his power, which nothing can render incapable, though it be great, and nothing can escape, though it be subtle. He sealed through us all he created, appointed us witnesses over those who deny, and increased us by his kindness over those who are few. O God, bless Muhammad, entrusted by you with your revelation, distinguished by you among your creatures, devoted to you among your servants, the Imam of mercy, the leader of good, the key of blessing, who wearied his soul for your affairs, exposed his body to detested things for your sake, showed open enmity toward his next of kin by summoning to you, fought against his family for your good pleasure, cut the ties of the womb in giving life to your religion, sent far those close because of their denial, brought near those far because of their response to you, showed friendship to the most distant for your sake, displayed enmity toward the nearest for your sake, made his soul persevere in delivering your message, tired it in summoning to your creed, busied it in counseling those worthy of your summons, migrated to the land of exile and the place of remoteness from the home of his saddlebags, the walkway of his feet, the ground of his birth, and the intimate abode of his soul, desiring to exalt your religion and seeking help against those who disbelieved in you, until what he attempted against your enemies went well with him, and what he arranged for your friends was accomplished. He rose up against them, seeking victory through your aid, becoming strong in spite of his weakness with your help. He fought against them in the center of their cities, and attacked them in the midst of their dwellings, until your command prevailed, and your word rose up, though the idolaters were averse.